Well, welcome to Chapter 6, Internal Consistency. As we can see from the previous chapters, we have several options as to how we pay people. There are many traditional choices, and those can be supplemented by an array of incentive programs. We can also choose some non-traditional options such as person-based pay. So, which is best? Well, as with most other decisions in life, there are several alternatives, and some of those alternatives are very good, and some are very bad, and some are kind of middle of the road. And there are many variables that define good, bad, or middle of the road. Among them are current business situation, resources available, organizational culture, leadership, competition, and on and on. But consistency is key during and after this choice. We can do a lot of things, but whatever we do, we must be consistent. In Chapter 4, I discussed training Daryl for my granddaughter. As I explained, training a service dog is all about rewarding performance. The currency is just different. Instead of money, we use food and praise. Now, once again, I'm not comparing people to dogs, but the concepts are the same. When training Daryl, the reward was important, but consistency was much more important. Consistent reward currency and consistent reward criteria and method. In the early stages of training for a new task, rewarding the desired behavior consistently was critical. People and dogs have needs and expectations. They expect that certain behaviors will be rewarded in certain ways that will ultimately fulfill their needs. When Daryl was told to sit, and he did so, he expected to receive food or praise and receive it within a specific period of time and in a specific amount. When people perform the task of the job adequately, they expect to receive pay in a certain way within a specific period of time. There you go. I guess I am comparing people to dogs, but that's a good thing, you see, because I love dogs. So the bottom line is, not how do we pay people, but how do we pay people consistently. Inconsistent pay practices can breed unrest just as quickly as inadequate pay. I expect you to pay me, but I also expect to know how, when, and how much I will be paid for my toils. I think you get the idea, but one other point needs to be made. Total consistency cannot always be achieved. People need to be flexible. Organizations need to be flexible as well. And to a certain extent, flexibility argues against consistency. In Daryl's case, there were times when I told him to sit, but I didn't have food with me or wasn't in a position to offer praise. During the training phase, Daryl was doing really well with verbal commands. If I told him to sit or down or come, he did so with just verbal instructions. I decided he was ready to branch out in his social ventures, so I took him to church. Being in a new environment meant he needed a lot of reinforcement and commands to understand how to behave. And I discovered it was very disconcerting to have someone verbally repeat, sit, 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 while the pastor was delivering the sermon. My commands and my rewards were consistent, but the environment changed. I started coupling my verbal commands with silent signals, hand signals, and Daryl learned to perform based on either command. Now, Daryl adapted to the new environment, as did I. Truth be known, Daryl taught me about as much as I taught him. And one thing I learned from that experience is that this reward and compensation thing is really pretty basic. The methods and practices, regardless of which you choose, require consistency and flexibility. It's a balance. It's always a balance. So we have established that one primary key to success of our paid investment is consistency. And the concept seems pretty simple, but there are many types of consistency, and therein lies the complexity. To this point, I've been primarily referring to consistency and how compensation funds are distributed throughout the organization. In other words, consistency over time in how the organization rewards people. Is the compensation program merit or incentive or across the board, etc.? And I said that organizations shouldn't jump from one pay system to another frequently. Changing from one money dispensing method to another is not only annoying, but it is destabilizing. And I'm sure you can understand that problem. There are a couple other consistency issues that are critical as well. One is consistency between people, and the other is consistency between jobs. An example of consistency between people is two engineers working in the same job, doing the same things with the same experience and the same performance history should be making the same amount of money. There should be pay consistency between like employees. The gender gap is an example of inconsistency in pay. This type of consistency is relatively easy to determine and must be monitored regularly. And we'll talk more about that in later chapters. Consistency between jobs refers to like jobs should be paid in the same range, and jobs with more responsibility or value should be paid higher. Seems simple enough, but is really very complex. Which creates more value for the company, accountants or engineers? Who should be in a higher pay range, HR managers or logistics managers? Who should receive more compensation, football defensive linemen or offensive linemen? The answer to these questions are complicated by human nature. To a certain extent, all football offensive linemen consider their contribution critical, and perhaps more so than any contribution on the defense. And most defensive linemen may respect the offense, but truly believe that their job is more important than the offensive lineman. Most college professors of math think their contribution and responsibilities are more difficult than those of English. And of course, we all know that professors and students of management and business are infinitely more important than any other discipline, right? You see the conundrum? Consistency is critically important, but also critically difficult. Why? Because consistency is somewhat based on subjective perceptions which vary from individual to individual. Consistency is not based on an exact science. So to reach some level of consistency, we try to objectify the subjective data as much as we can. We place values and numbers on the data in a manner that people generally believe is fair, once again, consistent and understandable. No one is really looking for or expecting perfection, but people want to know that when looking at the pay structure, there is a reason one job is valued more than another, and it is not an arbitrary decision. The methods outlined in the text offer that response. We all like consistency, and we really like consistency in our pay and reward systems. We all want to make sure that someone else is not making more money than we are if they are doing the same thing. We all want to know that if the company says we value this job this much, then everyone doing that job will be making the same. That's particularly true at the bottom end of the job complexity scale. Apples to apples should be paid the same. However, as you go up the scale of job complexity, consistency becomes much more difficult to determine because it is more difficult to make apples to apples comparisons. Two production workers sitting side by side doing the same task and seniority is not a consideration should be making the same pay. The same could be said for retail cashiers, two customer service call center employees, two fast food workers. But when you start bringing in seniority, performance, incentives, and other factors, the comparison becomes much more complex. Have I ever received enough pay? Yeah, actually I have. More than once I have felt that my pay was adequate for what I was doing and for my contribution to the organization. I believe, however, that realization came from understanding how pay was derived more than a high-handed cosmic understanding of my personal presence in the universe. In other words, knowledge creates understanding, and understanding how the process works is important to job satisfaction. I believe it is important that the system for valuing jobs and establishing pay should be communicated to employees. Employees don't need to understand all the intricate little details, but the basic understanding of how values are derived goes a long way towards creating trust and satisfaction with the compensation system. However, when you start comparing non-similar jobs, you have just complicated the consistency exponentially. As you can see, relative worth or value of a job can be a touchy issue, but it is one that we must address. And the text outlines generally accepted methods of creating that value in such a way that it can be compared across and up and down the organization. And there's a difference between how large and small organizations should utilize these methods. Large organizations have individuals in HR who are specialized in the compensation function, and one of their responsibilities is to conduct job analysis and job evaluations. And such analysis should be conducted and reviewed on a regular basis as jobs become open or change. This is very acceptable in large organizations because they can afford to hire the specialized expertise to conduct such analysis in an objective manner. In smaller organizations, the process is much more difficult. Once again, the job analysis and evaluation process is a part-time endeavor in small organizations. HR professionals in small organizations probably don't have the expertise and definitely don't have the time to devote to this complex duty. Under the job analysis section in the text, the authors indicate that the first step is to determine the job analysis program. They further state that, quote, a company must decide between using an established system or developing its own system tailored to specific requirements, end quote. I'd like to throw a caution to that statement. Small organizations should choose an established system. If it is necessary to develop its own system, the organization should engage external consulting assistance. There are three problems with small organizations developing their own system: time, expertise, and objectivity. I've already mentioned that time and expertise is an issue, but objectivity can hinder job analysis as well. The credibility of the job analysis depends on listing the tasks performed, evaluating the value of those tasks, and comparing those values to other similar jobs. Sometimes it's difficult to separate the real job task required from the people performing the task. If I know Sally and she's in that job, I may attribute some of Sally's characteristics to the job. In other words, I know Sally is very dependable and very decisive. And if I like Sally, I may give more weight to dependability and decisiveness. My personal feelings get in the way of objectivity. That closeness and familiarity is generally not an issue in a large organization. But some small companies, it is nearly inescapable. What are the consequences of loss of objectivity? First, the system one develops may have little credibility among employees and managers. Perceptions of favoritism may loom large. Second, there may be legal issues connected with discriminatory practices, and those can be very costly. So the solution for small organizations is to hire outside expertise. They bring credibility and objectivity to the endeavor. When at the Novell Group, I did just that. Our organization was fairly large, and I certainly didn't know all of the employees or even the majority of the employees. However, I knew enough to be uncomfortable with my objectivity, particularly when dealing with management and professional employees. Time was also an issue, so I brought in an outside consulting firm that specialized in compensation, and the results were a custom-made job analysis and evaluation system with well-detailed job descriptions that fit our unique business. I should point out that there were still some employees and managers who were skeptical of the final results of the job analysis process, even with the outside expertise. That's always going to be the case. No system will erase all the skepticism of everyone. However, the outside expertise did address the reliability and validity concerns. And that also addressed the legal issues mentioned above. Reliability means that the system yields consistent results under similar conditions over and over. Validity means that the system actually measures what it purports to measure. For example, if I go to my doctor for an annual physical and he conducts a test that measures my blood sugar level, that test is reliable if it measures blood sugar levels consistently time after time. If he conducts it on a Monday and a Tuesday or on the first week of the month or the last week, etc., it measures blood sugar levels accurately each time. It yields consistent results time after time. This test is valid if it actually measures blood sugar levels and not something else. Our job analysis and evaluation system must measure the value of a position regardless of when or whom conducts the analysis to be reliable. The system is valid if it actually measures the value of that job based on the criteria and not on the person in the job. If the system is reliable and valid, it is generally defensible in court from a legal perspective. It is also much more acceptable to employees and management. The good news is that we don't have to develop a system from scratch. There are plenty of already established job analysis and evaluation systems from which we can choose. We don't even have to detail the job duties and responsibilities from scratch either. There are plenty of online references and surveys available. We'll further discuss surveys in the next session, and in that session, I will give you some cautions concerning untrustworthiness and the data. But there is one resource or tool that's good and ties into the internal and external consistency issues. Want to know what people do? Pick a job, any job. Student, baker, attorney, welder, teacher, coach, HR professional, electrical engineer, printer. All are jobs we see all the time, but what do they really do and what is really required in that particular job from incumbents? What traits and skills are necessary to accomplish those activities? The text mentions ONET website as a free job analysis resource. Take a moment to go look at the ONET site, or you can go to onetonline.org. Both sites contain a wealth of information about various jobs, including descriptions, specifications, future outlook, etc. Go to ONET Online and look up any occupation. You will find a lot of information on the site that is useful for you as a job applicant, but also useful to the organization. This is a great tool and one worth investing some time and energy exploring. So there you have it. Internal consistency. Required of the pay system, difficult to determine, necessary to address, and certainly an issue that has many options available for solution. Next week, we will take up building market competitive compensation systems, which translates into external consistency. Do you get the feeling that consistency may be a big issue in how we pay people?